Good morning, everyone not at ISTE. My name is Amber Lee, and I am broadcasting to you from New Mexico, but I actually teach in Southern California. I've been teaching special education for a little over 11 years. Today, we'll be talking about how to support students with individual education plans, IEPs. I know you probably want a bunch of strategies that you can turn around and utilize in the classroom with your students right away. And even though it may not seem like that at first, that is exactly what I'm going to be giving you. Towards the end of the presentation, I will enumerate strategies for students. I promise if you do the important work up front, the benefits of student learning and student connections will be amazing. First thing that we need to talk about in supporting students with IEPs is FAPE 1 accommodations. So FAPE stands for free appropriate public education, and every student is guaranteed that. This is a legal document. It is any teacher of a student with an IEP can be held accountable for the information that's provided in this document. What I would suggest doing is making a spreadsheet or doc of each class, cut and paste accommodations for all IEP students. Whether you create a spreadsheet, a doc, or a note card for each student, there is certain information that you should collect before the school year begins. These are simply suggestions, and you can always add as much information as you would like. Ultimately, the most important thing is that you have the information in an easily accessible place and that you utilize this when creating lesson plans. So IEP language is the language of disability, and I like to think of it as eligibility. Each student with an IEP is eligible for supports for a specific reason. Now, while you don't need to necessarily know students' eligibilities, I think it's powerful, and this knowledge allows you to learn more about helping different types of students. So it's a good idea to understand what eligibilities are. Now, the next piece of information I would put on this spreadsheet is what accommodations are on the FAPE 1 page of the IEP. Since you're responsible for providing these supports, you need to know what they are. You will notice that many students have similar accommodations, and there will always be a few that are different for each student. I also like to have a complete list of all of the supports required for all of my students, like a master list. All right, in the next field of my spreadsheet, I have notes section for my students. I utilize this in many ways. For example, if a student has a medical condition, I want this noted. Also, when I learn about a student interest, I like to make a note of it because it helps me connect individually with students and provide differentiated assignments whenever possible to engage the students who are struggling to learn the most. And the last section I have is for students with BSPs. That stands for Behavior Support Plans. It is extremely important that when students are working on changing a behavior, perhaps this is a student with autism who doesn't track the speaker, it's vital there is a consistency in each classroom and setting, and that each teacher knows and supports the student in achieving their behavioral goals. I have additionally found that this is a great place to take notes of how the student is doing with the goal. So when the case carrier contacts me, I have that information available easily. Okay, so what I have shared with you thus far is the very basic responsibility of all teachers that have students with IEPs. However, if you really want to impact learning, there is so much more that you can do for the students. All teachers should become familiar with UDL, Universal Design for Learning, which is not a framework for students with IEPs, but it's a framework to engage and respect all students. Similar to UDL, all teachers would benefit from reading Differentiation from Planning to Practice by Rick Romelli or any book by Carol Ann Tomlinson. Okay, so when your lesson or unit is over, what do you want the minimum to be that the students walk out of the room knowing? This may sound silly or almost juvenile, but in order to truly serve students with learning struggles, this is imperative to know. I use the framing routine. It's a SIM strategy developed at KU to make sure I have clear learning goals. Even if you don't use this with the students explicitly, you should know this for yourself. Sometimes we work on creating amazing learning experiences and we think the learning objectives are clear to students. But if you ask them, you will find out that is not always the case. Once you've determined the true learning objectives, how can students show they've met the learning goals? After you've determined what students need to show mastery of, how can they present the information to you? Sometimes we think we know what is best or the best way to show knowledge, but this does not work for every student. I like to give at least 3 options for an assignment so that students can show me what they know in a manner that works for them. So I generally use some type of digital choice board. I've made a Wordle of tons of ways that students can show learning. Whenever possible now, assessments should match the type of work that you do in class. It is extremely confusing for students with IEPs to work hard on projects for their classwork and then turn around and have a multiple choice assessment that really assesses a different type of skill. The multiple choice questions simply look confusing, and there always seems to be a couple of correct answers. Often, students with IEPs are simply used to failing this type of test, and they will hardly even attempt it. While it's important to understand how to answer multiple choice questions, unless you practice and taught that skill, your assessment should be something the student is familiar with. I've included an amazing infographic done by one of my 11th graders focusing on the connections of characters in the Crucible. The details this student included are absolutely incredible, and I never could have taught her to do this. This was a classroom assignment that shows creativity and critical thinking. And you bet when it came time for the finals, students created a different infographic comparing 2 texts. In this manner, the assessment matches the assignments, and I am able to clearly see student learning and understanding of content. Next thing that you need to know about supporting students with IEPs: give directions in multiple formats. Some students are auditory learners and they can listen to you read the directions and they are off and running, while other students need extremely explicit visual instructions in order to process what you need them to do. I noticed early on in my teaching career that if I simply give verbal directions, only a few of the students will begin working. It is not that these other students are being non-compliant, they just needed the directions in a different format. So do not get upset when you've explained the directions and a student almost immediately asks you to repeat them. Many students have processing deficiencies, and if your first direction is to get a pencil or a Chromebook out, the student starts doing this, and then if you are talking and explaining while they are doing this, they won't hear you. Everyone will be working, and 1 or 2 students will just be sitting there with a pencil in their hands looking around. Repeat directions and include written directions. More often than not, students with IEPs will know more about the topic than they are ever capable of demonstrating to you during an assignment or an assessment. Many have sequential or organizational deficiencies, which makes accessing and illustrating their knowledge difficult. At the same time, sometimes even more detrimental, many students with IEPs simply lack self-confidence, and this prohibits them from beginning an assignment. If you show models of how it could look, this will often give the students a starting point. I try to provide models of similar assignments and not the exact assignment so that the students will still get a chance to show their own creativity. Not all students need the model, but many cannot begin without it. If your assignment is to write a couple of paragraphs or a short answer, what does that look like? Some students may write 1 or 2 words for short answer and then be upset when they don't receive credit. As you can see on my paper model, I show a place for a title and I have 2 paragraphs indented to remind students that what is required and how it should look. The absolute most important aspect of connecting and engaging students with IEPs is nothing technical. It's simply to get to know them and have fun. Often they come to school every day and receive D's and F's in the majority of their classes because not all teachers make accommodation for their learning needs. If you are open and connect with each student, this will not only build confidence and improve their daily environment, it will also allow the students to find an entry point to learning. So as a quick wrap up, what you need to do to help students with special needs is know the accommodations, provide options with assignments, provide directions in multiple formats, provide models of what the work should look like, and get to know students and have fun. Thank you so much. If you have questions or want to connect, I can be reached on Twitter at SpedTeachLove.